The windshield wasn't just cracked. It was shattered, letting the Wyoming blizzard scream into the luxury sedan. Isabella couldn't feel her hands anymore. Her phone lay dead on the passenger seat, just like her hope. The snow was burying the car, turning it into an icy tomb. She closed her eyes, her breath coming in shallow, freezing gasps, accepting that this was the end. But then, over the howl of the wind, she heard a sound that didn't belong, the heavy rhythmic thud of hooves. A shadow blocked out the blinding white snow. A massive horse, and a man wrapped in a duster coat, looking like he had been carved from the mountain itself, wasn't just a stranger. He was her only chance. The silence of the Wyoming wilderness is usually peaceful. A kind of quiet that settles into your bones and makes you feel small in the best possible way. But tonight, the silence had been replaced by a roar. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was hunting. Tore through the canyons of the Teton Range, stripping the pine trees of their needles and turning the air into a blinding vortex of white. Isabella gripped the steering wheel of her silver sedan until her knuckles turned as white as the snow piling up on the hood. She should have listened to the gas station attendant 3 towns back. He had looked at her low-profile tires and shook his head, spitting onto the asphalt. He told her the pass was treacherous in November. But Isabella was an architect from Chicago. She lived by deadlines, not weather reports. She had a client meeting in Jackson Hole at 9 a.m. sharp, and nothing was going to make her late. Nothing. Except nature itself. The car felt less like a machine and more like a sled as it hit a patch of black ice. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't have time. The world simply tilted. The steering wheel spun uselessly in her hands. The car slid sideways, mocking her control, and danced right off the shoulder of the highway. The impact was loud, a crunch of metal against a hidden boulder, followed by the terrifying sound of glass shattering. The car dipped nose first into a ditch, dangerously close to the drop-off into the valley below. Then everything stopped. Isabella sat frozen, the airbag deflating in her lap like a tired lung. The heater had died instantly. The cold didn't creep in. It rushed in, claiming the space immediately. She tried to open the door, but the snow was already piled high against it, cementing her inside. She checked her phone. No service. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The cold began to bite through her wool coat, seeking the warmth of her skin.
Alice.
She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that nobody knew where she was. A shortcut to nowhere. She closed her eyes, the shivering becoming violent. Her mind started to drift, thinking about the blueprint she had left on her desk. The coffee she hadn't finished, the empty apartment waiting for her in the city. It all seemed so small now. And then she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a crunch. Heavy, deliberate. She forced her heavy eyelids open. A dark shape loomed outside the shattered window. It was massive, blocking the wind. A horse, a black horse, steaming in the cold, its mane whipped by the gale. A gloved hand wiped the snow from the broken window. Blue eyes, sharp and intense, peered in. They were crinkled at the corners, framed by a scarf and a cowboy hat pulled low. "Easy now," a voice rumbled, deep enough to be felt in her chest. "I've got you." The door was wrenched open with a groan of metal that sounded like a gunshot. The man didn't ask if she could walk. He seemed to know she couldn't. He reached in, his arms strong and unyielding, and lifted her out of the wreckage as if she weighed nothing more than a sack of feed. He smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and horses. It was the most grounding scent she had ever known. He wrapped a heavy canvas blanket around her, shielding her from the biting wind. "Hold on to me," he commanded, not unkindly. He lifted her onto the saddle in front of him. She buried her face in his coat, her frozen fingers clutching the fabric. The ride was a blur of motion and cold. She drifted in and out of consciousness, anchored only by the steady beat of the horse's heart against her leg and the solid, unmoving presence of the man behind her. His chest was a wall of warmth against her back. He didn't speak, he just navigated the storm, a part of the wilderness rather than an intruder in it. Time lost its meaning. When Isabella finally opened her eyes again, the roaring wind was gone, replaced by the crackle of a fire. She was lying on a soft leather sofa. A thick quilt was tucked around her chin. The room was bathed in the orange glow of a stone fireplace that took up an entire wall. The air was warm and smelled of pine and sage. She sat up slowly. Her head throbbed, but the bone-chilling cold was gone. She looked around. It was a cabin, but not a vacation rental. This was a working home. The walls were made of rough-hewn logs. There were shelves lined with old books, a pair of worn work boots by the door, and a kitchen that looked well used. "Drink this." She jumped slightly. What? The man was standing by the kitchen island, holding a ceramic mug. Without his hat and heavy coat, he was even more imposing. He had dark hair that was slightly too long, brushing the collar of his flannel shirt. His face was weathered, tanned from the sun and wind, with a jawline that looked like it was chiseled from granite. Isabella took the mug with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice sounded raspy. "You saved my life. You were driving a toy car on a mountain road in November," he said flatly. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You're lucky my fence line was down, or I wouldn't have been out there to hear the crash." His name was Colton. He didn't offer a last name, and he didn't ask for hers. He was a man of few words, and every word he spoke seemed to carry weight. "I have to go," Isabella said, instinct kicking in. "My meeting. I need a phone." Colton shook his head slowly, taking a sip of his own coffee. "Lines are down. Cell towers are frozen over. The pass is closed, ma'am. Drifts are 10 feet high. You aren't going anywhere for at least 3 days." 3 days. To Isabella, 3 days was a lifetime. 3 days meant missed deadlines, angry clients, and a crumbling schedule. But looking at the window, where the snow was piled halfway up the glass, she knew he was right. The first day was an adjustment. Isabella paced the small cabin like a caged animal. She checked her phone every 5 minutes, praying for a single bar of signal. Colton ignored her anxiety. He went about his business with a calm efficiency that was infuriating. He would go out into the storm to check the horses in the barn, coming back stomping snow off his boots, bringing a rush of cold air with him. He chopped wood, the rhythmic thwack of the axe echoing through the walls. He cooked simple meals, 2 biscuits, strong coffee, and ate them in silence. By the second day, the silence began to shift, stopped feeling oppressive and started feeling ... peaceful. Isabella watched him from the sofa. She watched how gentle his large hands were when he was oiling a leather bridle. She noticed the way he paused to look out the window, not with impatience, but with appreciation for the land. "Why do you live out here?" she asked suddenly. It was evening. The fire was dying down. Colton looked up from his book. "Why do you live there?" he countered, nodding toward her phone on the table. "'Cause that's where everything happens," she said. "The culture, the business, the architecture. I build skyscrapers, Colton. I change skylines. I build fences," Colton said softly. "I keep things safe. I watch things grow. Out here, you can hear yourself think. In your city, I imagine it's hard to hear anything but the noise." Isabella opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. He was right. When was the last time she had just sat and thought? When was the last time she wasn't reacting to an email or a text? "Come here," he said, standing up. He grabbed a coat from the rack, an old canvas barn jacket that was 3 sizes too big for her, and tossed it to her. "It's freezing," she protested. "Trust me." She followed him out onto the porch. The storm had broken. The sky was clear, a vast dome of velvet black, and the stars. Isabella gasped. She had never seen stars like this. There were millions of them, clustered so thick they looked like clouds of diamond dust. The Milky Way was a bright slash across the universe, as Colton said, his voice low, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "This is why I live here." Isabella looked up, her breath pluming in the icy air. She felt a tear prick her eye. It was so beautiful it hurt. She looked at Colton and found him looking at her, not the sky. The air between them suddenly felt charged, hotter than the fire inside. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing a stray snowflake from her cheek. His touch was electric. For a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. She wanted to forget Chicago and the meeting and the deadlines. She wanted to stay in this moment, under these stars, with this man who made her feel safe. But he pulled back. He cleared his throat and looked away toward the barn. "Getting cold," he muttered. "Best go inside." The third day was the hardest, not because of the boredom, but because she knew it was ending. Isabella found herself helping. She couldn't chop wood, but she could stack it. She couldn't fix the fence, but she could hold the tools while he worked in the barn. She learned the names of his horses, Buster, Sage, and Whiskey. She learned that Colton had inherited this ranch from his grandfather, and that he fought every day to keep it running against developers who wanted to turn the valley into condos. She saw the blueprints of his struggle, the stack of bills on the counter, the weary slump of his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. "You need a better system for the barn insulation," she said, pointing to the roof where heat was escaping. "And if you rotated the grazing faster in the south pasture, you'd save on feed." Colton looked at her, surprised. "I thought you only built skyscrapers. Efficiency is efficiency," she smiled. "I'm good at solving problems." "You are?" he agreed. His eyes lingered on hers. "You're good at a lot of things, Isabella." It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded different when he said it. Precious. That night they sat by the fire again. The tension was palpable. They talked for hours about her childhood in Ohio, about his dreams for the ranch. They laughed, a genuine, deep laughter that Isabella hadn't felt in years. She fell asleep on the sofa, and in the middle of the night she felt him lift her up. He carried her to the bed in the back room, his bed-and tucked her in. He slept on the couch. It was a gesture of respect, of protection, that made her heart ache. The next morning, the sound of a heavy engine woke her. Snowplow. Isabella ran to the window. The road was being cleared. The sheriff's truck was following the plow. The bubble had popped. Colton was already outside, talking to the sheriff. He looked up at the window and saw her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Packing her few things took 2 minutes. The sheriff offered to drive her into town to a rental car agency. "I guess this is it," she said, standing on the porch. The sun was blindingly bright on the snow. Colton stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops. He looked like he wanted to say something. He looked like he wanted to grab her and tell her not to go. But he was a rancher, scratching a living out of the dirt, and she was a city architect with a silver sedan and a schedule. "You take care of yourself, City," he said, using the nickname he'd given her on the second day. "You too, Colton." She hesitated. "Thank you for everything. Just doing what needed doing." She waited for one more second, hoping. But he tipped his hat and turned toward the barn. He didn't watch her get in the sheriff's truck. He walked away, back to his silence, back to his horses. Chicago was loud. Isabella sat in her corner office on the 40th floor. The view was spectacular steel glass and the gray expanse of Lake Michigan. Her phone was buzzing with notifications.
Her team was waiting for her approval in the new shopping complex designs.
She had been back for 3 months. She had won the contract. She had gotten a promotion. She was successful.
I.
And she was miserable. She looked at the blueprints in front of her, lines, angles, concrete. It all felt so cold. She closed her eyes and saw the stars over Wyoming. She smelled the wood smoke. She heard the crunch of snow under heavy boots. She went on dates. Men in expensive suits who took her to expensive restaurants. They talked about the stock market, about summer homes in the Hamptons, about networking. None of them knew how to fix a fence. None of them knew how to sit in silence. None of them looked at her the way Colton had, like she was something rare and necessary. She felt empty, a hollow shell walking through a life that didn't fit anymore. One Tuesday evening, staring at a microwave dinner in her silent, perfect penthouse, Isabella realized the truth. She wasn't building a life here. She was just maintaining a facade. She remembered what Colton had said. I watch things grow. She wasn't watching anything grow here. She was watching things rust. Isabella stood up. She walked to the window and looked at the city lights. They didn't sparkle like the Wyoming stars. They just glared. She picked up her phone. She didn't call a client. She called her boss. I quit, she said. The drive took 2 days. Isabella didn't drive a sedan this time. She drove a 4-wheel drive truck with all-terrain tires. She had boots in the back. And a set of architectural plans not for a skyscraper, but for a modernized, energy-efficient barn and a greenhouse system that could sustain a ranch through the winter. The snow was melting in Wyoming. Valleys were turning a vibrant green. The air smelled of mud and new life. She turned onto the dirt road that led to Ironwood Ranch. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, louder than the engine. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want her back? What if the magic was only there because of the storm? She pulled up to the cabin. It looked exactly the same, yet smaller than she remembered. Colton was there. He was by the corral, hammering a loose board on the fence. He wore the same hat, the same flannel shirt. He stopped hammering when he heard the truck. He turned slowly, shielding his eyes from the sun. Isabella opened the door and stepped out. She took a deep breath of the mountain air. It filled her lungs, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt like she could breathe. She walked toward him. Colton dropped the hammer, stood perfectly still, as if he were seeing a ghost. You're lost again, he called out, his voice rough. Isabella stopped a few feet away from him. She shook her head, smiling, tears stinging her eyes. No, she said firmly. I'm not lost. I was lost in Chicago, I think. I think I'm finally found. Colton didn't say anything. Crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't hesitate this time. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He held her so tight she gasped, but she held him back just as hard. No. You came back, he whispered into her ear, his voice cracking. ... I thought I dreamed you. I'm real, she said, pulling back to look at him, and I'm staying. If you'll have me. Colton laughed, a sound that rumbled through his chest and seemed to echo off the mountains. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. I'd have waited 100 winters for you, he said. And then, right there in the mud, with the horses watching and the sun warming the earth, the rancher kissed the city girl. It wasn't a desperate kiss of survival, like it might have been in the storm. It was a promise of seasons to come, of fences to build and of a life to grow, together under the endless Wyoming sky. Isabella knew with absolute certainty that she would never need a return ticket. She was home.